This is Steve's end of year 2022 newsletter, just a little late. It's February. And I found out this is a little more difficult than I anticipated with the number of errors I induce into the recording. But it's certainly a lot easier for me than typing the document out. I'll start off with a short review of the boys and their families. Todd's on the East Coast. They're still in Severna Park, and he's with Fidelity. And he's doing his Ironman runs, and he's trying to schedule one, I think, in Finland or someplace over there. But he's in real estate. And the kids are doing fine. Naomi's in 9th grade. John is in 8th grade. They're both involved in basketball at this point. Corey and Jane are in Lincoln, Nebraska. He's with the university on the Egg campus, and she is a massage therapist and is putting smiles on a lot of people's faces. Jane's youngest daughter, Sophia, is a senior in high school there, and she'll be starting college in the fall. Update on Corey's children. Alicia will be separating from the Army, I believe, this summer. Presently, she's Seattle, Washington, with Marv. He's the helicopter pilot. Anyway, they're looking to see if they want to be a good match. She is in an internship with Lockheed Martin and should separate from the Army probably this summer. Brandon is on his second tour in South Korea. He's in the artillery, but will be returning to the United States in, I think, October, and then getting into the intelligence field. And his wife, Michelle, is a occupational therapist and living and working in Omaha while he's overseas. And the twins, Amanda is still in Hawaii enjoying the sun and surf and probably nice fish food and things like that. And Ashley moved to Missouri and is in the engineering field still, and they all seem to be happy. Ryan and Aaron are in California. They live in the small town of Alamo, south of Walnut Creek. Ryan is with Indeed, an online company, and Aaron is just starting a job with the Federal Reserve Bank in San Francisco. And the girls seem to be doing fine, Aubrey and Anna, and they're doing what I guess little girls do. I'm not in much contact with them. On May 18th, I headed towards Grand Lake on Amtrak, but before leaving, I attended my teammate's graduation from high school, and we spent 5 or 6 years together. Presently, he is attending McCook Community College, and I have a new teammate, and his name is Max, but he's only a 7th grader. When I arrived in Grand Lake on the 18th, the main water line into my little house in town was frozen. But I did get the water going on the west side of the cottage, so for about 2.5 weeks, I slept and showered on the South Shore cottage and then spent the rest of the day in town. Normally my days there are I get up the Grand Lake Center and I work out there for about an hour and a half, had breakfast, and then I'd head home to do projects around the townhouse. Done some re-landscaping, moving lots of rocks. Worked a little bit more on the bunkhouse. On Tuesdays, I have Rotary. On Wednesdays, at the Kaufman House Museum, I'm a guide, and I go through and give tours. And then I help out a little bit at the cottage court, which is to the east of my house in town. On Friday evening from 7 to about 9:30, I help out at Rotary Bingo. And we do bingo every Friday and Saturday night all summer long, and then do just projects and have fun, meet people. One of the really fun projects that happened around the 4th of July when Corey and Jane and Sophia and Josh, the boyfriend, were there, was I saw hikers going by the cottage camp. And I realized they were walking the Continental Divide Trail. It starts in southern New Mexico on the Mexican border and goes all the way up to Canada. And it goes right by my little house in town. The next morning when I went to coffee at the Jump Start, here were a couple of those hikers. A nice young lady, her name ended up being Paulina, and Matt. And so I didn't know if they had a place to stay, so I offered them the opportunity to stay in the bunkhouse. Later that day, they called and said, yes, they'd appreciate that. And I know the thing they probably enjoyed the most The two things were they slept in a real bed, and they were able to take showers after 4 days on the road from Winter Park. They stayed long enough to go to the Rotary Pancake Breakfast, which I worked, and then they saw the fireworks that night, and they had a really neat time. The next time I heard from them was as they were crossing the Colorado-Wyoming border, and they sent me a text message and said they'd made it that far. And then in September, I got one as they crossed from the United States into Canada. Paulina was from Denmark, and she's an organic farmer, and she was going to head back there after that. Matt was an engineer, and they just happened to meet on the trail in New Mexico, decided to walk together for a ways, and then became a couple. The next CDT hiker that come by was Chan. Chan was from Savannah, Georgia, and he'd started out in April, just like the previous hikers, and he'd made it to Grand Lake. And he was tired and smelly and needed a place to stay, so I put him in the bunkhouse. We hit it off, and he stayed several days. He helped me do a few projects. I actually finished them up, because I can come up with the idea and materials. I can probably make the shelf or whatever it is, but I can't see to install it. So he stayed and installed them for me. Then he headed out with the intention of getting partway through Wyoming and then having to circle back, and he was going to come back for a few more days, which he did. I don't remember the name of the next two hikers, but they were going from north to south, and they were just going to do a piece of it. They were both from Colorado. And before they left, I think they stayed 2 nights, as they strung the old clothesline that I had salvaged from another property that was being torn down, and they strung the wires on it so that I was able to use that to dry my sheets and things like that when I didn't want to in the dryer. Chan made it back in towards the end of August, and he needed to fly home. So he came in on the train and then stayed a couple days, and he even cooked me a nice meal, a southern-style family recipe. During the part of one day, he built a workbench for me on the front of the bunkhouse under the overhang so that I can be outside and I can work out there. It is wonderful. Moose weren't the issue this summer for Anna's place and me. It was this black bear that wandered down Jericho Road most early mornings or evenings, and it got so he traveled during the day. He would occasionally stop by and knock the hummingbird feeder down on the east side of the cottage and then lick up the juice. He never broke it. It chipped a little bit, but it was always functional. Well, one day at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, some of the renters looked out, and here he was trying to get to the bird feeder again. He must have felt the vibes, because he turned around, saw the people looking out the window at him, and he sauntered off to the west side, where he got into the trash can over there. Fortunately, there were just a couple of empty pop bottles that he smelled, so it wasn't much to clean up. On the 4th of July weekend, Corey, Jane, Sophia, and Josh were there visiting for a few days, and I talked Josh and Sophia into working the Saturday night Rotary Bingo game. And so they parked their car at my little place in town, walked into the pavilion, did their thing with the Rotary Club, and as they walked on the boardwalk on the way back to the little house in town, someone yelled at them from across the street, and they said, "Hey, turn around and look behind you." They did, and here sauntering behind them on the boardwalk was the black bear. The bear didn't bother them. They got in the car and went home, and I was sound asleep and didn't learn about it until the next morning. Jumping forward a couple weeks, when Todd and family arrived on Saturday, they dressed up and went to the yacht club and left Naomi and John there at the cottage. Naomi came downstairs, looked at the back door, and it was open, and here, sticking its nose through the doggy door that was in the screen door, was this bear's nose. So she hustled over, slammed the door, bear reared up, put 8 little dents in the screen, and blew its nose on the screen. So I left it there, and it just wandered off. I've wondered how many times Naomi was able to tell that story to her friends back in Severna Park. She probably had enjoyed telling it, and they were truly amazed. Later that month, the black bear, I should call it Jericho, I guess, got into one of the neighbors' VRBO places west of the lake cottage, and it tore off some of the under siding under the old cabin, and then came back a second time and tore it up again, looking for where the smell was coming from. And in that time, it ruptured one of the water lines. Then it went around to the west side and into the utility room, broke in the metal door, got a big sack of yucky trash, pulled it out, and proceeded to go through it. The next day, a couple of friends were taking a walk down the road. They noticed the water running, so they called me. I went over, turned it off, and then saw what the bear had left behind. This huge bag of garbage and lots of little kids' diapers in it. So I cleaned it up, found somebody to replace the door that was destroyed. The wildlife department came out with a trailer and a trap on it, left it there for 4 days. Bear didn't show back up. They came, took the trailer, and 2 days later, the bear came sauntering back down the road, got into the neighbor's trash next door to Bonnie's house, and made quite a mess. The bears are pretty smart up there, at least this one is. The rest of the summer was pretty quiet. I rented Anna's place through the middle of September, and then I started doing housekeeping duties, draining the water, oiling the railings and some of the siding, rebuilding the screen door that it seems to get worn out every couple of years. Just did that, and I got on Amtrak on October 20th and came back to McCook, and 2 days later it snowed in Grand Lake. My timing was perfect. To cap off the end of the year, Alicia and Marv came through, picked me up on their way from Colorado Springs, and took me down to have Christmas with Corey and family. It was really a wonderful time. It was cold. I think I only went outside once when I was there. It was so cold. After Christmas was over, I had a real surprise. I'd planned on going back on Amtrak, but Corey and Jane decided they were going to make a visit. So they packed me up with some other things and headed west. They dropped me off, and then they went back to see Corey's mom and Sandy in Kearney. It turned out to be a wonderful year, and I enjoyed it. I survived it, and now I'm looking forward to my next trip in May back to Grand Lake. If you got this far, I'd like to wish you all a wonderful 2023.